Hi friends, welcome or welcome back. It's Angel. I've been thrifting and DIYing, so I thought I'd take a moment to share what I've been up to with you. Today we're going to take a look at 3 very simple and affordable DIYs that have a very high-end look. So let's get started. Something that I'd wanted to DIY for quite some time is a distressed floral vase. In the spring collection, Magnolia introduced us these really sweet, charming vases that are distressed with a floral pattern on them. I really liked the way they had a cozy, time-worn look to them, and I thought that we could create something similar on a budget. So I ordered this package of 2-ply floral napkins from Amazon. They had a small floral print to them that was similar to some of the things that I had seen on Magnolia. So the first thing that I did was go through with just a pair of scissors and cut around these floral patterns. You do not have to be really careful about cutting around them, because when we begin to apply them to the vase, we'll be able to clean them up. I purchased this vase from Goodwill for $3.99, gave it a good coat of white spray paint, and then began to apply my napkin appliques, if you will. So the first thing I did was separate the 2-ply of the napkin apart, so you're left with just that one thin individual piece. Now what I'm showing you here is what I did first, because I want to show you what not to do. My intention here was to apply these small cutout appliques with water first to ensure that I had as few wrinkles in the single-ply napkin as possible. It seemed all well and good when I started, because I was able to really keep the napkin smooth and move it around on the vase very easily. It was also quite easy to shape up around this applique by just taking my fingernail to remove any of the excess cuttings that did not really appear to be a part of the applique. I hope that makes sense. But here's where it went wrong. After I had probably 5, as you can see, water glued on here, I went through with a matte Mod Podge and thought I could just go right over the top. What happened, and I'm sure many of you are shaking your heads at me, and rightfully so, as I began to apply, that wet napkin picked up and it started to shift and move. It became a real challenge, after having kept it all nice and smooth, to keep those wrinkles out of it. So I went through very carefully, and I was able to Mod Podge all of these on and keep them as smooth as possible. But what I would recommend, and it is much easier, is what I'm showing now. Simply put the Mod Podge in a thin coat directly on the vase first. Then you're going to take your single-ply napkin that you've pulled apart and lay it on the Mod Podge. Just lightly tap it down, and then we're going to go back in with that small paintbrush and the water and then smooth it out. What happens is the water and the Mod Podge kind of come together, because that napkin is so thin, it begins to get wet, and you can very easily shift the applique napkin around and keep it smooth. But as soon as you have it in the right place, the water evaporates, it dries, as does the Mod Podge, and you get this beautiful flat effect. So do what I did the second time and not what I did the first. So after all of the appliques had dried, I wanted to add a little bit of distressing on this vase. Our inspiration piece had a little bit of a brown, very worn look to it, and I wanted to be able to try to replicate that. So I put just a little bit of antiquing wax on this paper plate and added in some baking soda. And I mixed it just so that I could get a nice rough consistency, because you'll note that after I put this on, I'm going to use my finger and a damp paper towel to just kind of rub this in and move it around to give it that very worn look that we've seen on our inspiration piece. Now, how much distressing you add in through the wax paste method that I'm using here is entirely up to you. I wanted to just try to really get as close to that inspiration piece as I could. Joanna's had some distressing around the top and then just a few spots on the outer portion of the vase and around the bottom. Now, if you noticed in the previous clip, this vase did have some natural distressing already at the bottom of the vase, which was a bonus for me. And the final step was just a good coat of our triple thick glaze. And I think overall, we got a pretty similar look to Joanna's vase, but for a fraction of the cost. This next DIY came about simply because I had extra napkins left over. So I wondered if we could not give this waxed pillar candle a custom hand-painted look. So I started by taking and pulling that 2-ply napkin apart, so we were down to just that single layer again. I thought that by slightly remelting the wax on this candle that we could transfer it onto the pillar candle itself. So the first thing I wanted to do was iron out any of the wrinkles or folds in the napkin. So I simply laid parchment paper right on top of the single ply napkin and ironed it out. Then I lined up my candle onto the napkin to try to get it to as close to the candle height, circumference, all of those things that I could. And then I trimmed off any excess. I laid the parchment paper back over that and went over it with a warm iron with no steam. That's really important. What this does here is just simply remelt the wax on the top surface of the candle, and that soaks into or absorbs into that single ply napkin that we have. I continued to just roll that napkin around, smoothing out and lightly melting or remelting rather this candle wax on this pillar candle. The candle I'm using is a battery operated candle, but you could use a regular pillar candle from Dollar Tree or Walmart. You can see there that once that wax has melted and then set up a little bit, that parchment paper peels right off, and then you just continue to melt and transfer that napkin right onto the candle. When I got that all done, I simply trimmed up my edges with scissors to get any excess napkin off of the bottom and the top of the candle, laid the parchment paper back over the top and lightly went over it again. That just ensures that I close off all of those edges to make sure that it truly looks like it's painted on. So anywhere on the candle that you need to trim up, whether it is the seam, which I would recommend putting at the back of your candle so that it's not as noticeable, or the top or the bottom, you can just lightly re-adhere by adding in a little bit more heat from your iron. The final step that I used to really give this a great look was crumpling up that parchment paper and basically rubbing or sanding over all the areas of the candle. It smoothed out the wax and it almost distressed and really blended in this napkin more with the wax to truly give it a hand-painted look. And actually I was quite surprised at how lovely they turned out. If you choose to do this with a pillar candle and an open flame, please be aware that I am not sure how the candle will burn down using an open flame. When I'm out thrifting, I always keep my eyes open for anything that is reminiscent of something off of a designer site. I thought that this vase looked so similar to something on Joanna or Shay McGee's site. But what I really loved are these woven hurricane lamps. McGee & Co. introduced these in their spring collection, and I loved the way that Shay displayed them in outdoor areas. I thought it was so sweet and added so much ambiance. So I thought, let's see if we can DIY something similar. So I came across these two very large vases at Goodwill. The smaller one was $8.99 and this much larger one was $9.99. I chose these because they are very heavy and substantial, and ultimately I'm going to use my hurricanes outside on our patio area. So just as luck would have it, that same day I came across this set of 3, I think they're seagrass placemats for $5.99. And I want to keep encouraging you guys, as I always state, Think of these things as material. When I looked at these placemats, what I saw was the exact material that we would need to go around the bottom of our hurricane vases. So I simply started by disassembling and taking these placemats apart. I used my scissors just to cut in and start to unravel each one of these rows. Initially, I was keeping it in a complete circle, but after thinking that through, I thought that keeping it in a long strip was probably more useful and user-friendly. So once I got that entire first placemat unwoven, if you will, or disassembled, I just used a hot glue gun to start to glue it around the bottom of the hurricane or the vase. Now when you glue this on, make sure that you keep that seagrass or woven material to the top of the lip, bottom lip, so that it will still sit flat on the surface. When I cut the material, the two ends I'm cutting at opposite angles so that when we get to that end of the strip and we glue it together, it looks like, as much as possible, one seamless piece of that sawgrass material. And I just continued this process using that long strip and measuring around the circumference of the vase and then cutting it, and continued to hot glue them on. You can see here I switched hot glue guns because that first one was a more pliable hot glue and I needed something that was a little bit more rigid to give it durability. As I'm going to be using these outside, I wanted to make sure that I had a higher temperature level glue because it does get very hot here in Florida and anything that sits outside has the potential to melt. So I wanted to ensure as much as I could that these would stay adhered to the glass. And here again, you get a better example of what I mean by cutting those end pieces at opposite angles so that you get that nice flush closure on the back. And I just continued to work my way up the vase, cutting each individual piece as I went along. And the final detail in cleaning these up was to ensure that any straggling pieces of the material that were sticking or popping up, I just put a dab of hot glue and then used my scissors to press those down in there. I really wanted this to have a clean, finished look, to be as similar to our inspiration piece as possible. And just for added security, I added these 2 bags of black gravel that I found at Goodwill to the bottom of my vase just to ensure that they were not a tipping hazard. This largest vase is 20 inches tall and the smaller one is 14. I hope, as always, friends, that you have found some inspiration here for yourself and for your home. Remember, home is a process. It takes time, and it solely belongs to you. Fill it with things that you love and that make your heart happy. And remember, as always, stay on the journey as we continue making our way home. Until next time, bye-bye.